What's up, freaks? This rip was brought to you by River. River's a Bitcoin company built by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners the right way. There's no trusted third parties. They build all their infrastructure. They have free DCA because they know it's the best way to buy Bitcoin. So if you want to buy Bitcoin, you want to mine Bitcoin, you want to send Bitcoin over the Lightning Network, you want to plug into their Lightning Network API. If you're a developer, they're building all these tools for you. They also encourage self-custody. Again, they're Bitcoiners. They want to provide an on-ramp for you and then teach you and encourage you to take control of your own Bitcoin. And they're doing this. It's a beautiful company. If you do hold Bitcoin on the exchange, you can know for sure, since they don't rely on any third parties, they don't lend your Bitcoin out, they don't speculate with your Bitcoin. Your Bitcoin is held in a multi-sig wallet with 100% reserves. Okay? So go to river.com/TFTC, take advantage of the no-fee DCA. You set up your dollar cost average. You don't pay any fees on those buys. If you're a developer, they have their Lightning Network Services API that you can build on. You can send over Lightning. You can mine via River as well. You may have your exchange. You may be comfortable with it, but have you tried River yet? It's a question you have to ask yourself. If the answer is no, go try it. That's where all the Bitcoiners are hanging out. That's where I get my Bitcoin as well. River.com/TFTC. Thank you guys for listening. If you're listening on YouTube, please subscribe, set the notifications up as well. We're going to be putting out a lot of content this year. If you want to subscribe to the podcast feed as well, if you're not around your computer or not listening on YouTube, but you want to catch the podcast on the podcasting feeds, subscribe on your favorite podcasting app. And if you want to learn more about Bitcoin, I write a newsletter almost daily during the week. Go to tftc.io, subscribe on the website, and you'll get pure signal on Bitcoin, macroeconomics, geopolitics, whatever tickles my fancy that day. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you for supporting the show. If you can subscribe, rate, review, goes a long way. We're trying to blow this up in 2023. Enjoy the rip.
You've had a dynamic where money's become freer than free.
If you talk about a Fed just gone nuts, all the central banks going nuts.
So it's all acting like safe haven.
I believe that in a world where central bankers are tripping over themselves to devalue their currency, Bitcoin wins. In the world of fiat currencies, Bitcoin is the victor.
I mean, that's part of the bull case for Bitcoin.
If you're not paying attention, you probably should be.
I think you're fine without it. If you want to pump the Bitcoin Times, you can wear it.
Yeah, I'll pump it at some point. I'll put the hat on. Let's go. Rock and roll.
Oh, yeah, you got the hat there. We're live. If you want to put it on, it's there to put on at some point. But
yeah, deal.
Yeah, the nomad life, it's a big con.
It is. It is. We've been sold this idea that one should uproot and go and travel around, which, like I said, it's probably good for a young person to go and experience different cultures and see different things and kind of expand their mental horizons. But I've sort of been in product development and running businesses all my life, and there's this concept called the double D, or double diamond. I shouldn't say double D, the double diamond. And what you do is you sort of, it's kind of like similar to how they describe creativity, right? You go outwards, you open up, you see a lot, you take in a lot of data, and you kind of like go broad and wide, and then you narrow down and you cull everything. And sort of, in a product development kind of role, you do that twice, so hence the double diamond effect. And I think that's important at some point, but I think you reach a level of maturity where you've kind of seen most of the things, and principles are often consistent and static no matter where you are and what you do. And you sort of get to a point where you're like, all right, well, it's time to like be more closed-minded than be more open-minded. And you kind of flip the switch. I think I'm there.
No, it's just funny that you bring this up because Friday night, my wife and I went to dinner with another couple, both transplants in Austin. with big families back in our hometowns, we had a very similar conversation, not in the context of product development, but just being close to family. And for me, myself, I moved from Philadelphia, where I'm from, right after high school. I've been gone ever since, so about 14 years now, which is hard to imagine, but no, that was the tenor of that conversation. Is like, yeah, I've seen the world. I've lived in Chicago, lived in New York, lived in Austin now. And the draw of the extended family back in the Philadelphia area is pretty strong. It's like, hey, I've gone and somewhat seen the world, and maybe at some point in the next couple of years, it makes sense just to go home and go back to where my roots are.
That reminds me of wifey and I were having a discussion on the weekend talking about friends and friendships. And I've been thinking about this a lot. And, I think over the last couple of years with COVID and all the hysteria and Twitter and all this sort of shit, I think people confused acquaintances with similar values with friends. And I think we saw a lot of that in sort of the Bitcoin community, with people thinking that they were friends and thinking that they were, super alike and all this sort of shit just because they didn't want to get a jab or were pro-Trump, for example. But then sort of when you dug under the surface, like what was missing, and this is sort of like the thinking I've been having, I'm curious on your thoughts on this, but I feel like friendship requires three things: common values for sure, more importantly than like-mindedness, like-valuedness, I think is extremely important. But two things that I think are missing, and this is probably a function of just modern civilization, and even libertarianism and all this sort of shit is to blame for this, is like we've moved into this individualist world where, to sort of tie the friendship knot is like common values, time, and shared experience. And I think those two middle ones, like the time and the shared experience, is something that at least I know I lost a lot of, because I moved a lot when I was young. I left my hometown. I went out like to the big bad world and university and then business, entrepreneurship and all this sort of stuff. And like, I really don't know anyone from when I was young anymore, honestly. And I think that's something that I've slowly been coming to terms with, in the sense that, you think you meet some people, you share some common values, but what's missing is that real time and shared experience. I'm curious to sort of hear your thoughts on that.
No, I completely agree. And I think bringing the concept of Dunbar's number, each individual only has a certain capacity to develop these types of strong relationships with others. And like you said, time and shared experience is definitely a big part of deciding who falls into your Dunbar web of trust. And I mean, I didn't have too dissimilar of an upbringing, but I did have good roots in Philadelphia, and middle school and high school developed really strong friendships with people that I'm still friends with to this day. And when I go home, go hang out with them, it's like nothing skipped a beat. And it goes back to shared experience in middle school and high school. And yeah, I think there's definitely something there. And I agree with like the Bitcoin thing. Like I love Bitcoiners, definitely do think many of us have the same shared values, but again, going back to the special ingredients of shared time and experience, going through ups and downs with each other. This may sound weird, but like I have, when you want to define people as actual friends, I probably have less than a dozen actual friends in the Bitcoin space.
Totally. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
No, it's something I think, like I said, I've been thinking through this concept, and there's a big difference between friends and acquaintances. And I know I've been on a real like rabbit hole, like reading a lot about ancient history, and particularly warrior cultures. And the two that I've really gone, or probably three that I've gone down the rabbit hole quite deeply on, is like samurai culture, the Spartans, before the Thebans, fucked them over and beat their asses. And then the sort of the silver shields and the royal guard and Alexander the Great, and how those friendships were so different. Like, they grew up as young boys together. They went through rites of passage, which are completely missing in the modern world. Like, they would go through ordeals, the famous Spartan agoge, right, where they'd take the child at the age of 7 from the mother, and then he had to sleep outside with the shelter that he made and fend for himself and all that sort of stuff until he became an adult. And that was kind of like the longest rite of passage in the ancient world. But these friends would fucking die for each other. Alexander's royal guard, his band of brothers, his generals, they would try to outcompete each other as to who would take the first sword or fucking bone, arrow, for their friend, for the man to their right. And I don't know, it's kind of contrasting that to the modern world. I know me, for one, maybe when I was younger I had some friends like that, but shit, man, my life took me in such different directions, and I think I fell for the whole the individualist trap, and you kind of you believe this lone wolf garbage, right? And you realize in the end that that's crap.
Yeah, and I mean, I think just people misconstrue or misinterpret the individualist mindset, which is, yes, you should be an individualist, try to make yourself the best person that you can be, protect yourself, your family, your friend group first, but that doesn't, like you mentioned, it doesn't mean you have to be a lone wolf. It means you better yourself. And I think what people need to bring into the conversation of individualism is you better yourself. Why? It's to better the group that you're surrounded by, to make your tribe as strong as possible. I mean, that's Bitcoiners shit on sports ball quite a bit, but I will say that growing up and playing a sport very competitively, developing, I mean, it's not like we were in the military, but warrior-like bonds with people that you played a sport with for many years is something I think that was very beneficial to my life and still exists to this day. Those bonds that were formed when I was a teenager. But yeah, I think the individual sort of meme is a bit misconstrued in that you have to tie in that end goal of you're only as strong as the weakest link, and you want to make yourself as strong as an individual as possible, because you don't want to be the weakest link in your web of trust.
Yeah, I mean, the concept of honor, right? So I will mention it here, but we can talk about it on a future podcast. So I'm writing a book right now called The Bushido of Bitcoin, and I think it's going to be my most important work. But basically, the whole premise of the book is that let me rephrase this. It's not another Bitcoin book about the history of fucking money and why Bitcoin's better and why it's going to win and all that sort of stuff. I think that's been done, and there's much better writers that have sort of handled that. The question I'm trying to answer is that if we assume that Bitcoin's going to win, that comes with the reality that Bitcoiners, especially the early ones of this sort of first epoch, the first 20 years, we are going to be disproportionately economically powerful and therefore disproportionately socially powerful. It's a very fucking different world. And what are the values and the virtues that we want to embody as individuals in that environment? Do we want to be fucking dickhead Lambo jerk off with Louis Vuitton sort of onesie, jumpsuit, or do we want to embody do we want to embody the virtues that emerge from the most difficult sort of environment, and the ones that I seem to have found that have parallels? Like, you look at the samurai Bushido code is 8 essential virtues of courage, honor, respect, duty, loyalty, benevolence or compassion, sincerity. Like there's this sort of code of ethics that was why. How do I say this? That code of ethics determined whether someone was a samurai, not just the fact that they had a fucking sword, right? And it was very similar in the West with chivalry. Like you were a knight because of what you embodied, not because of you wore the suit and had a horse, right? And this is sort of my question in this book is like, who do we want to become and how do we want to behave? And I take all this sort of historical anecdotes and kind of like weave it into a book. But anyway, like it's I've been doing a lot of thinking on this, and one of the ideas in there is like we need to once again build strong tribes, and in particular, like all the co-ed shit that has happened in the last 50 years. Like I wonder if that was like one of the major psyops, right? Like literally like disentangled like boys from being able to create boys groups and girls from being able to create girls groups and all this sort of stuff. Like I think there's something there, and men need to come back and like rebuild these fucking bonds and these groups. Like to use the German term Männerbund, right? Like it's the group of valiant men together. So anyway, it's total tangent to what we're supposed to be talking about today, but it's something that I've been doing a lot of thinking about recently.
No, I like it. And to your last point, I mean, I think I'm an example. Like I went to where I built those strong bonds, playing sports ball, lacrosse particularly. I went to an all boys high school, a prep school, and I think that was a massive benefit for my life. You can get in like, I mean, this may come off wrong, but like I don't think boys and girls are meant to, particularly in that point of life, like it's a bit of a distraction to put them together and expect them to grow.
Yeah.
Because I remember how horny I was in 8th grade when I was at public school, in the co-ed public school, and it was just literally distracting. Just looking at asses all day, and you go to an all boys school, and it's just there are distractions, but there isn't that weird pubescent distraction where you're
totally. Yeah, when you're a kid, you've got zero dick control and zero any of that control, and you're just like fucking like a little puppy, running around whatever the next shiny thing is. And there was a dude that I was talking to who he's outside of the Bitcoin space. He's more sort of like in the he's kind of built a brand in the masculine space, but from a very different angle. So he built a payments company, CEO, quite successful. It's kind of like sort of our age, I think, like late 30s. Maybe early 40s or something. And he, before like homeschooling and all of that sort of stuff was cool, like he and his wife, like unexpectedly, had a baby at like when he was in his early 20s. Like they weren't planning on it. And, she fell pregnant and they're like, fuck, what's the best thing for us to do as a family? And, they both agreed that he would go and bust his ass fucking work and she would take care of the family and grow the family. So they had this sort of like good symbiosis from a gender roles perspective. And what's interesting, in that conversation was he talked about how the reason they chose to homeschool their kids, and what he said that kids being around other kids, we've sort of been taught that that's a good thing because, they need to grow up with their peers and shit. But he said like, when they go to school, kids are not learning from the teachers. They're not learning from the school. They're learning from the other kids around them. And the level of intellect of the kids around them is dumb as fuck because they're kids. They don't know any better. They're not learning from the teachers. So they're not actually maturing as individuals. They're remaining kids all the way through the 12 years that they're in school. And you come out and you wonder why you're not ready for the world. Whereas, he talked about how even 100, 200, 300 years ago, before sort of schooling started happening as a mainstream thing, it's like the kids grew up influenced by their parents. That's why you had fucking people like, whatever people think about Rockefeller now, but the guy had nothing. And by the time he was 21, he was a multimillionaire. He'd figured out businesses and all this sort of shit. Like that kind of maturity existed back then because kids didn't actually go to school and weren't sort of forced to learn amongst, peers who were stupid, basically, which is essentially what we all are as kids.
Yeah. No, I've actually talked to Justin Moon a lot about this. I mean, obviously the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds those big family names are, many could argue very effectively that they're perturbing the world because they've amassed too much power and are using their money and influence to put forth this Malthusian view of the future. But if you dig into like the history of those families, they were very focused on engendering a culture of, hey, we have a family business here. I'd like you to join it, but you have to earn your way in, and sort of basing a structure and a lifelong education about growing to become part of the firm. It's really fascinating. I mean,
well, it's like an emphasis on maturity, right?
Yeah.
Like instead of an emphasis on remaining a kid all the way through to your fucking 20s.
Yeah. And one thing I did want to mention too, like going back to Dunbar's number, and yes, many Bitcoiners have a lot of shared values and we align a lot philosophically, but when it comes down to it, who are your actual friends who you spent a lot of time with and gone through some trials and tribulations with? Yes, that number may be small. It doesn't mean that you don't want to be friends with every Bitcoiner. It's just you don't have literally the mental capacity to juggle all those connections. So you have to choose, and maybe you don't even choose. Maybe just the outcome of your life and your experiences, what you decide to do in this space dictates
where it takes you.
Who your actual friends are.
Yeah, totally. I think that's it's a very valid point. Like maybe this is a good segue into what we originally wanted to talk about, but like this concept of quality over quantity, right? And I think this is another one of those contrarian viewpoints in a world where, like, I was listening to an AI podcast about AI shit the other day, and they sort of keep talking about like how everything's going to be abundant, and we're breaking down barriers and all this sort of shit, and you just hear that so much from the nerds, basically, right? And like the push, the effort, the intent is all about complete like abandoned, like mindless abandon with respect to abundance. Like everything should be abundant, and no restrictions, no boundaries, no walls. And for me, this is one of the things I just absolutely love about Bitcoin, is that Bitcoin's kind of like it's almost like a classical solution to modern problems, right? It's like Bitcoin is a set of restrictions, effectively, like 21 million, the block size, the block height, the block time, like all this sort of shit. It's like a set of restrictions that then kind of give you some guardrails within which to operate, because like, if you have unbounded freedom, you don't actually have any order or structure. So, there's something I quoted in this new book that I'm writing, which is like, I actually think unbounded freedom, like complete liberty maximalism, is actually immoral, because you need some sort of responsibility and order in order to like to bring some, I guess, conservatism to the process. Like there needs to be a counterbalance to complete open freedom and liberty. And anyway, like to me, that sort of ties into this concept of quality over quantity, because quality is something that is a conscious restriction on stuff. And what are we drowning in today? We're drowning in just noise. Everything's fucking free. You've got fucking information all over the place. Like everyone's throwing shit at us, and trying to decipher through that stuff, and being able to consciously, as you said, pick fewer, deeper friends, because you have a certain amount of time that you have available to you to build the depth and to have shared experiences. And then with respect to the stuff that you consume, like, what you do, like whether it's food or information or the people you spend time with or the stuff you do with your kids, whatever, like putting like limits on those things, I think is, I don't know, it's really important. And I feel like the older I get, the more I start to really appreciate all that stuff. So a bit of a rambling tangent, but
no, but I mean, we can tie this into the Bitcoin Times latest volume, but before we even get there, like, I mean, this is sort of an idea that is reiterated time and time again over history, whether it be via religions or certain types of monastic cultures, which is like you mentioned, the samurai virtues. I mean, Catholicism, you have the virtues. I mean, the Tower of Babel is a story in the Bible that really highlights what you just said. You have a quantity of all these languages that just confuses people and sets them off all these wrong paths towards hedonism, and structure is not a bad thing. And I agree, Bitcoin does bring back structure to the digital age, particularly from a monetary aspect. And that's a lot of what the Austrians are preaching too, right? Like with human action, it's like if you have a money that is sort of structured and is somewhat predictable, you have very stringent rules of that money. With the gold standard, it was there's so much amount of gold above ground, and we know via market forces that only so much will be produced year in and year out, depending on what the price is at any given point in time, due to the cost to actually get that gold out of the ground. And now with Bitcoin, it's gold on steroids. But the main sort of thesis being that, like, if you have this money that's run on somewhat strict rules, you can begin to order your life outside of that monetary system within the economy in a much more efficient way that is going to bring more quality to the market.
Shit, I had myself muted. Yeah, totally. Like these limitations are necessary. And like in many ways, I would think of responsibility as a virtue that is a virtue of self-imposed limitation, right? Like when you want to be responsible, like, you know, it's all good and well to stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning, you know, but the responsible person is like, I got to get up at 6 to get some sunshine, go for a run, go to the gym, etc. So like the responsible person places a limitation on themselves, go to bed at 10 o'clock, for example, or the responsible person doesn't overeat, you know, or the responsible person puts money aside to save, you know, like, so this kind of, this ability to place restraint onto things that you could otherwise be free to do, I think is a sign of maturity, right? And this kind of comes back to, I mean, it's funny how all these things like have parallels, right? It touches on what we were talking about before about like maturity and becoming an adult, you know, when you're younger. Like the way you do that is by realizing that it's not all about just like unhinged freedom. Like I started to even cringe when I see like, you know, liberty maximalism on people's Twitter profiles. I'm like, no, you know, like, can you add some responsibility maximalism there as well, please? Like, because you sort of can't have one without the other, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, the libertarian meme is a meme for a reason, because it just completely co-ops and corrupts the good themes of the movement, which is like, hey, non-aggression principle. I'm not doing anything wrong. Don't you shouldn't physically harm me or put me in jail. But then you get like the hedonistic side of libertarians that want like kiddie porn and furries and all that shit to be above board as well. It just,
yeah. Well, that's the shitcoiners, right? It's like I'm people are consenting to it, so why not, right? I read this essay about a week ago. It was called something like, it was on Substack, something to do with like consent not being a moral standard, right? It's like just because someone consents to something doesn't mean that it's a good thing. It's like, and one thing I remember from the essay right at the end, he says, we shouldn't be asking ourselves, you know, where is the harm? We should be asking ourselves, where is the good? Like, and that's a, you know, very different thing, because it's like, you know, where is the good in rolling fucking hex coin? Like, I mean, other than, you know, that fat ass buying new Louis Vuitton, you know, jumpsuits, I don't see, you know, any good out of that whole project. But, you know, his argument will be, where is the harm? There is consent. There is a market for it. And like that kind of stuff to me is like where you know, get into the realm of like, you know, ethics and morality and this sort of deeper thinking, which I don't know, I feel like we've, you know, to a large degree lost in the world. Like I was speaking to a dude the other day who was pitching me a business idea of like, he wants to make basically an app to make, you know, ordering hookers easier. Like, and he's like, the whole world's degenerate, so like may as well. And I'm like, well, that's why the whole world's degenerate, like because it's the may as well attitude.
Yeah, there's a market here. I should exploit it. It's like you have to have the urge control to put your effort somewhere else, which is that's another point that should be brought up. It's not always easy. The easy path is the hedonist path, where it's much easier to just be sexually promiscuous, to put off building a family, to scam people with shitcoins, whatever it may be. It's a lot easier. You can literally hit a button with shitcoins and spin one up, and if you can tell a good story behind it, it's very profitable. It's much harder to build out a critical layered infrastructure like people are attempting to do on Bitcoin. It takes longer. There's not as much immediate reward. And so you have that, and can bring in time preference. You have that time preference aspect where people want quick thrills instead of slow, methodical building of a cathedral that could bring long-term prosperity to others.
This is touches actually back to the samurai culture and even chivalric culture is this idea. So in the feudal age, the merchants were actually seen as below the peasants. Particularly by the samurai. Samurai had like a major disdain for the merchant class in the feudal hierarchy, and that was because the merchant class were known to be the type to just abandon any moral compass. Like they didn't believe in that. Like they would easily be bought and sold, right? They could sell someone out, they could buy someone, they could do. That's all that mattered. Like it was just pure commerciality to them. Whereas the samurai sort of had this perception of themselves, which is like honor above money, for example. So kind of like this idea of like reputation almost as a currency. It's like there is this moral dimension to the universe that has its own sort of measure that you can't quantify with coin, for example. And that's sort of like the warriors like operated on that realm, while the merchants operated on the other realm. Now, I do think, and this is something I put forth in the book, is like, could Bitcoin create a healthy overlap between sort of this commercial reality of the world, where sort of like you have this material realm that requires money in order to measure it and kind of tie deeds to consequences, right? And Bitcoin does that very well. If you're a moron and you spend all your money, you're going to have no money, and there's no way sort of to socialize that loss, right? And does that in some way tie into this sort of different moral dimension of of ethics, values, reputation, and some sort of like almost like a moral ledger to existence. Does better behavior in the material realm like kind of reflect it in some way or impact it? So it's a very interesting thing that I guess we'll only find out 200 years from now, right, after we're dead, and looking at our children's children.
I don't know if we have to. I don't even know if we have to wait that long. I think we're actually seeing a microcosm of this play out right now, like after 2022. Yeah. Like if you think of Bitcoin and the overarching crypto space in 2023, I think last year, a lot of people who were sort of playing both sides of the fence, DCG being a good example of this, BlockFi, the people that built those companies, Gemini and these services, I think they've burnt a lot of their reputational capital over the last 12 months. And moving forward, the people who really put reputation ahead of profits, you think of companies like Unchained, like River, disclaimer, sponsor the podcast, but it's for a reason. I align with these people because I think they have the good long-term vision, or building out infrastructure the correct way, or not scamming people. In the future, I think it's going to be hard for the people in the last year who burnt that reputational capital to actually come back and begin building the critical infrastructure. I think people are, maybe they come back and they say, hey, I'd like to build this with you or invest with you. And I think, who knows, it's yet to be seen, but I wouldn't be surprised if many of the people who are building the critical infrastructure are like, no, go away. I don't want to be associated with you. Yes, they may have gotten quick profits in the first 14 years of Bitcoin, but it's still very early in the game. And a lot of those people burnt that reputational capital. And I don't think it's going to be easy to recoup that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a, very, very valid point. And, that sort of adds evidence to the idea that, there probably is a, an overlap, or at least an influence between these sort of two worlds. So it's going to be an interesting thing.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting. Does it validate the Austrian thesis?
Does it validate? I think so. I mean, it's funny. So one of the chapters actually in this book, so I tried to like pull on some threads. Like I looked at ancient traditions that had some overlap with Bushido, and then I tried to like create a code of virtues of Austrians. And like I said, I'm well aware of the fact there is no fucking moral code of Austrian economics. But I said if there were, these are sort of the virtues that I would imagine it has. And sort of there was like integrity in there. There was responsibility, self-control, restraint, and I think that one is specifically like a very very Austrian-like ethic. This idea of don't just go and push the fucking money printer button every time you have a problem. Like, have some self-control, goddammit. And I think that in this because we've sort of been in the century of no self-control, right? We've been in the century of like complete abandon. Like do whatever the fuck you want to do, drop bombs on people, go, do this to people, lock everyone down, like do whatever the fuck you want to do. Sort of this century has been. And print as much money as you want, solve whatever problem you want. And, the Austrians have sort of been like sitting here on the corner saying, no, it's a bad idea. And like everyone's been ignoring them. And, now that it's time to sort of pay the piper, I mean, most people are oblivious to what the actual problems are. Obviously, they think that the problems are the greedy capitalists for raising their prices at the like the greedy corner petrol station who's making 3 cents profit on the gas. It's his fault. While Biden and crew are like taking 80 cents. Like that's the level of intellect that we're dealing with in the world today. But like at some point the tide is coming out, the tide is receding, and people are sort of starting to get a sense for where the real problems are, and this is maybe the Bitcoin is like the Austrians' last laugh. It's like we try to warn you, this sort of shit doesn't work, and like Bitcoin's this emergent phenomenon that is like made, I guess, for lack of a better term, Austrian economics great again. Like it's the trump card. It's the ace in the sleeve that we've sort of had this entire time. Yeah.
And I guess it's a perfect segue to talk about the latest volume of the Bitcoin Times, volume 5, correct?
Indeed, yes.
The Austrian edition. And so is this what you tried to get through with the consortium of writers that you collected in this volume to really get this message across, how Bitcoin works, how it changes things? And then then Raheem obviously has a piece that's focused on a different sort of tangential idea to Bitcoin as well. So really trying to
the history.
Yeah.
I mean the whole premise of this. So this was the first edition that I specifically look to do around a theme, right? So all the previous editions were sort of more like hobby-esque in a sense. The like last year's edition, we're actually in 2023. So sorry, 2021's edition was called A New Hope. So that had like Farrington and Tomer and Brandon Quittem and stuff like that. And it was like a collection of essays. And there was a bit of a theme there. The theme there was like, hey, last year in 2020, we got a bunch of guys together and we wrote about how fucked up the world is. And that was like Jeff Booth and Parker Lewis and all that sort of stuff. And like sort of, what Bitcoin's role is to play in, maybe fixing that. But it was kind of like I just shouldn't say depressing, but it was more downbeat. And so then 2021, I was like, let's do something that's more of a, hopeful. And, each of the pieces were magnificent in edition 4, but edition 5 was really, okay, let's take a theme or a concept and let's look at Bitcoin through this theme. And then let's look at the theme through Bitcoin. So sort of like this two-way lens. And the theme was the sort of this Austrian idea. And I mean, I'm so fucking happy with how the design came out. I don't actually have one on me physically because I'm overseas, but do you have one on you by any chance?
I do.
Yeah, it's like McKenna did a fantastic job like that. And then, the back cover is like my favorite with like all of the greats sort of collaged in there,
Yeah, I love the
pieces.
You guys based the color scheme off of like the roof of this. Right.
Yes, basically. Yeah. But what we did was actually we took that building, and then we used some like one of those like AI things to kind of like give it a sense of like an oil painting, and then we used that color tone all the way throughout. So anyway,
very beautifully done.
Thank you, sir. So the design sort of all came together to kind of like bring forward this idea. But yeah, each rider. So it was like, I think my claim to fame on this one is I managed to convince Bitstein to come out of hibernation and start writing again. So that was like my one of my goals. So Pierre obviously wrote a piece in there. Saifedean, Raheem, Conrad Grafu. I don't know if a lot of Bitcoiners know who he is. Like I didn't actually know who he was until like I was having a conversation with Bitstein, and he mentioned Conrad as someone that should definitely. It was actually Tua Demista who mentioned him. Tua was supposed to actually write a piece for this, and he just had some personal things going on, so he couldn't make it. So maybe one day I'll do an Austrian edition 2 or something, or maybe a history edition, because I think Tua would be great for that. But yeah, he mentioned Conrad, and Conrad wrote a magnificent essay in there, and yeah, basically each person took an idea, and Saifedean's was this making time preference low again, like this idea of, we've basically been talking about it this entire podcast, like maturity as something that occurs as one has the ability to save money and therefore lower time preference and therefore mature as an individual. And that's kind of like the loop of Saifedean's piece, obviously, but in more depth, and he looks at like time preference in civilization, time preference in the individual, time preference in Bitcoin, et cetera, and yeah, Pierre did one which has a really like, it's one of those short pieces with like one killer idea that most people maybe haven't thought about, but it's like he talks about the difference between risk and uncertainty, and why risk is something that you can sort of account for, and that's why things like insurance exist. But uncertainty is something that can only be minimized through a technology like savings. And the ability to save across time is dependent upon basically the commodity, good, or network that actually acts as money. And he uses that as the argument that Bitcoin is actually a uncertainty reducing mechanism, and that's why it's better money than gold, because gold has more inherent uncertainties associated with it. So you can and what he does by doing that is he kind of separates the discussion about price risk versus the actual functionality of Bitcoin as a network and as a good through the lens of uncertainty, which I thought was like really powerful. It actually took me twice to read that essay before that like point actually clicked, and I was like, fuck, that's such a good like separation. So like when people want to think about like the gold versus Bitcoin argument, that like article is such a good one.
Yeah, and a good follow up to that one is a piece that Bitstein just dropped in his Substack around Bitcoin being a speculative asset. It's he really dives into that concept of risk versus uncertainty there too.
Oh, beautiful! Fuck, I haven't read that yet.
Yeah, it's a great short read, but but all these concepts are important to understand.
Yeah, they're like the sort of like I kind of think about it as like using an intellectual scalpel, and this is something you and I were talking about this, so we'll probably make an announcement on this podcast about what this year's edition is going to be. But when I was speaking to these authors about like contributing, and I said this to you the other day, is like a lot of the stuff that we talk about and that we're going to write about Bitcoin has in some way, shape, or form been said by someone already, or the connection's been made, or someone sort of said something about it on Twitter. But like being able to, I don't know, take these ideas and these overlaps and try and either shine a new light on it or a different angle or something like that, or at least come away with like one or two good ideas, like requires almost like an intellectual scalpel. Like you need to be able to like slice through to like the core of an idea and kind of like pull that out and be like, here. And I think that, each of the authors in this, like, I think did a really good job of that. But it's a challenge, especially in an industry like Bitcoin where, everyone's fucking writer apparently. Like, everyone's writing something. Like there's so much fucking content out there, right?
Oh yes. No, that's what I'm excited. I mean, I know you teased it, but I'm really excited to be a part of the next edition because that's something I write almost every day. But it's like I was telling you last week, it's a bit ephemeral. It's a hot take on something that's going on in the space or something I've been thinking about, and really sitting down and thinking about the topic that I'm going to write about and spending a lot more time on it, and hopefully it can be a more evergreen piece that is not as ephemeral as the daily newsletter is something that's really exciting to me.
Totally. I mean, well, we may as well tell people what it is. So like this year's edition, so the 2023 edition is going to be the energy edition. So this idea of like looking at Bitcoin through the lens of energy and looking at energy as a concept, as an idea through the lens of Bitcoin, and sort of what that symbiosis, because like for me, I can't remember who said this like on Twitter like ages ago. It could have been Breedlove, but sort of, kind of like framing Bitcoin as energy money, or it could have been Sailor or something like that. But just sort of that idea that like energy is, and I remember reading Vaclav Smil's book, Energy and Civilization. In there, he quotes energy as like the universal currency. And it really is like, other than time, like, energy is this sort of thing that's like a closed circuit, and, you just can't like sort of create a little bit more here on the side just because like, everything that we're doing is a tapping in or a transformation of energy. And, that sort of, closed conservative sort of, ideal just maps so well over to the idea of a money that is like based in fucking reality. And for me, that's what Bitcoin does so well, and that's what the shitcoiners, for example, don't see. Like they just try and virtualize away the very reality of something like energy or time, that you can't sort of create more of those. So it's like, let's just fucking pretend that doesn't exist and let's just play our virtual game over here. So if you've got any thoughts on that?
I mean, it's literally tied to the function of the network of proof of work. It's funny because like, what is energy? Energy helps you be more productive. It helps you do more work. It helps you leverage your intellect and your like ability to move things in the physical world to be more productive. And I think when it comes to Bitcoin and energy particularly, I mean, energy is uniquely tied to this digital asset where it doesn't work without energy. And that's why it's proof of work. Like you need to prove that you expended energy in the real world to create this value in the digital world. And I know many Bitcoiners like myself have been talking about it for years, but I really don't think that the wider public really understands this very unique connection of the physical world via energy and the digital world via the scarce token that has a profound impact on humanity. Most people don't realize it yet.
Yeah, dude. Like Brandon Quidden like wrote that piece in edition 4 about the pioneer species, right? Like how you plant a Bitcoin miner somewhere, and in the same way as a pioneer species kind of becomes the the thing that like concentric circles of life kind of form around. Like, a Bitcoin mining operation essentially becomes the thing that bootstraps energy in a region that energy was probably not profitable to to install or extract. And like that kind of thinking blows my fucking mind when I think about, fast forwarding 50, 100 years from now, like how basically inextricably linked and tied to, energy that, money is going to become. Like that's such a fucking big brain. Like I'm that meme with the Wojak with the fucking brain kind of coming out and just sitting on it. That sort of reminds me of that. It's like when you think about how much of a profound impact that is, and it makes me think like whether Satoshi actually thought of that or not. Like how much of this sort of thinking and ideology is like emergent because we've kind of got this thing now, like thinking about all the other stuff we can do with it, versus how much this progenitor of Bitcoin like could envision, but just sort of kept to himself so that he didn't sound like a fucking maniac in the beginning.
Yeah, well, it's emergent, but we're also just observing what's happening. I think that's the best part about this particular topic is it's not like hypothesizing or theorizing about what it could do. Yes, maybe it is theorizing about what it could do at scale, but we're observing this happen in real life. I mean, you have plenty of examples like Gridless in Kenya. That's what they're doing to bring cheaper electricity to these rural areas. I just had Adam Popescu on, who wrote that piece on Virunga National Park and how they're using mining at a hydroelectric dam with excess capacity to basically drive revenues for the national park and make sure the people that are living in the area have electricity. We're seeing it at Standard Bitcoin in rural parts of Tennessee, where we're helping the local economies, the rural economies that have had falling populations over the last few decades due to a hollowing out of their manufacturing base due to globalization. We're helping them economically keep electricity prices low. Like the proof is in the pudding. I think that's my favorite part about this particular connection with Bitcoin and energy and this what did Brandon call them? The
pioneer species.
Pioneer species. Like it's actually happening.
Yeah, totally. It's there's, I mean, the other rabbit hole that I think is going to become more significant in the coming 5 years is sort of the relationship, well, maybe not relationship, but like the emergence of nuclear power as well, and like how Bitcoin might be able to help bootstrap that, because like, we are living in a just an extraordinarily strange era. Like, you've got these incompetent buffoons that, they can't conceive of like how people can find a way to, create more flourishing by creating more energy, that they think that the only solution is to just like turn everything off, and like basically reverse the clock. Like it's just so petty and pathetic that like, we're actually living in a world where people are running around saying like carbon is bad and that energy is bad.
Well, I mean, that gets to the point, like they're creating a solution to a problem that I honestly don't believe exists. And then tying this back to like Austrian monetary theory, like they're only allowed to LARP about this problem because they can print money and throw it at it with this either decommissioning of nuclear plants in favor of wind and solar, whatever it may be. Like this is only a product of subsidies where you're subsidizing these inefficient, unreliable energy sources that are making our grids less secure and less reliable at the end of the day, because you can just print money and create these credits out of thin air and give them to these companies. And it's weird, actually. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, which is like Bitcoin mining provides this mechanism pre-Bitcoin standard to actually like keep that LARP going, because now a big problem a lot of these solar and wind farms have, which is similar to the nuclear generation problem, which is like they can build up all this capacity, but it takes a while to build out the transmission lines to actually deliver it. And so now with Bitcoin mining, being able to be the buyer of first resort of that electricity while you're waiting for the transmission lines to get built out, and the subsidized crap is actually like, oh, look, like it's even better now. We have Bitcoin mining that can finance these operations, produce revenues early on. But under a Bitcoin standard, or you can make the argument that the subsidies, the handouts to get those projects off the ground in the first place probably wouldn't exist. You'd be building more reliable energy sources that have actual costs, or their costs are represented in the actual price.
What do you think happens there over the long term, actually? Do you think that, because, as Bitcoin becomes more prevalent, it fucks with, the incentives, and, things like subsidies, etc., become less attractive. But at the same time, in the short term, while there is these incentives, people will try and use Bitcoin mining, for example, as you said, to subsidize or to justify these subsidies and going and building. So kind of like, it's almost like Bitcoin's chewing away at the integrity of these, unreliable sources of energy, but in the short term, kind of supporting them. So like, do you think it gets to a point where it kind of, erodes them so that they just abolished altogether? Or do you think it gets cheap enough, like we get better at those things by virtue of Bitcoin existing? Like, what's your thoughts there?
I don't know. In my opinion, just if you look at the raw materials necessary to do any of the quote unquote renewable energy at scale, it doesn't make any sense to me. And I think it goes back to something they were discussing earlier in this discussion, which is self-control. I think if you're a Bitcoin miner that is actually a Bitcoiner who thinks we're going to transition to a Bitcoin standard, you're partaking in a big marshmallow test right now. Like, yes, you may get low cost of electricity with the subsidized energy right now, but if the dollar keeps getting debased and the subsidies go away, like, you could be setting up what you think to be a multi-decade mining operation and something that's not going to be profitable at some point in the medium term, which, again, going back to self-control, I think a lot of people in the industry need to keep the marshmallow on the table and think about second and third order effects of Bitcoin succeeding, and saying, maybe I shouldn't be spending all this capital and time on this operation, because if Bitcoin succeeds, which I would imagine many miners, not all, but many, think it's going to succeed, and that's why they start mining businesses in the first place, should internalize that future reality. If Bitcoin does take over, that they're going to be mining on using electricity is going to become significantly more expensive because it's not being subsidized anymore.
So are these solar farms like being subsidized from a capex standpoint? That's sort of what you mean, right? Is like, so they're building a business model around, this is the cost of setting up, because once it's set up, right, there isn't really a cost to the production on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, I think it's dual faceted. It's the initial capital. You can get like cheap loans if you're doing a renewable project, and then on an ongoing basis, you get tax credits, so you get reduced tax bills for operating that type of, which just gets weird. It's like, I think taxes are bad and immoral as well. But when you compare, like, why should a coal plant or a natural gas plant have to pay higher taxes?
Pay
just
more,
because,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it just perturbs the pricing mechanism of all this shit.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, I get reached out a lot by people saying, we're looking at doing this Bitcoin mining and it's sustainable. And, whenever I hear the word sustainable, I just like, I'm like cringing, waiting for like the solar panel piece or the wind piece. Well,
that's, again, language is important here. Sustainable and renewable, particularly because I wrote a piece about this a couple of weeks ago, which is the whole term renewable is a massive psyop, because to the unwitting masses, it puts a picture of this perpetual motion machine in their head, where, yes, the sun is likely to rise every day, and the wind is likely to blow pretty consistently in some areas. So they are sustained sources of energy, but you have to harness that energy. And so like when you say renewable energy, people think of this perpetual motion machine, but it's not a perpetual motion machine. These technologies that harness that solar and wind energy have front ends of their supply chains, which are very energy intensive and depend on fossil fuels. And then while they're up and running, it takes a lot of maintenance. You got to replace parts. You got to scrub the solar panels, do all that. And then on the back end, these things have life cycles. They're not perpetual motion machines. You don't just set them in motion and they run into perpetuity. They have a few decades at best, and then you have to replace them. And that comes with another front end of the supply chain, another capital injection, more maintenance. Like, it's not the whole term renewable just really puts this idea in people's head that simply isn't true.
Yeah. I mean, one of my pet fucking peeves is like the I think there was that photo going around of like the solar panels in the landfill, and it's like, just, I mean, both in the landfill and then outside of the fucking landfill, these like large, beautiful areas, like especially when they cover grass up, like, you got these grassy hills, this sort of like beautiful land that could be like pasture land or something, or just beautiful and green, and they like just cover it up with these fucking panels. It's like, it's the most, I don't know, like fiat nature degrading shit I've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, the negative externalities of the environmental destruction just comes from them existing and not allowing light to actually reach the plants that desperately rely on photosynthesis. Like, that's not talked about. I mean, wildlife, animals that are affected by this. The trade-off, again, it's just use the terms renewable, sustainable, and try to make everybody believe that these are good terms that should be striven for, and then you don't talk about the trade-offs that come with it. It's, again, I think a big psyop and a disingenuous marketing campaign.
Totally. It like really rubs me the wrong way. And it's funny, just like for the record, when I was in my early 20s, I was totally psyoped, and I was selling solar panels. That's what we were putting on people's houses and stuff like that. And the only reason that people did any of that was because the government paid for half of the system through these credits. And then they gave people input tariff deductions. So that way, if you were running solar panels, like, it made pure economic sense to do so. And I always find this funny. It's like, the Keynesians, and like this to tie it back into the Austrian economics piece, it's like they laugh at Austrians and say, incentives don't matter, right? So then the way they get their stupid programs and ideas across the line is by offering, tax write-offs or, tariff inputs or fucking made up certificates, which inevitably, skew the economic system in some way, but it actually incentivizes people to go and make a decision much better than any of their other methods. So it's like they ignore the Austrian school of thought when it doesn't benefit them, and then they use the basis of Austrian thought, which is incentives, when it does benefit them. It's such a fucking laugh. It drives me crazy.
When they can control the incentives, they like to rely on that core principle.
Yeah, it's like, it doesn't exist. But for this it exists. Okay.
Yeah, but going back to like order and structuring and stuff like that, I think I recorded an episode earlier or last year with a gentleman by the name of John Constable out of the UK, and I think if you freaks haven't listened to that episode yet, you should go back and listen to it, because you're going back to this concept of order and entropy. Like, it's much when you just look at a photon produced by the sun versus kinetic energy produced by wind versus hydrocarbons versus nuclear energy. Like, literally the structured order has a spectrum, and on the far left of the spectrum, very little order is solar and wind. And as you get closer towards nuclear, you get more and more order and structure, which allows you to be more efficient and productive with those particular sources of energy.
I mean, that's so order. Basically, what you're saying is like brings density, right?
Yes,
because that's
exactly.
essentially what you're doing. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. That's such a great analogy. I'm gonna go back and listen to that. That's a yeah, like because that's essentially what noise is, right? Like noise is like filling the air with unstructured stuff, right? Like and this sort of like ties into another thing that I've done a lot of thinking on is like music. Like why does some music sound good and just some music sound like fucking like screeching in your head, right? Like so there's something about like the fractal nature of the universe that certain like why does the fucking octave exist like in music? Like it just does. Like there's a pattern there, right? And like it's a function of order, as you said, and it's a function of like a density of like tonality and sound, like to sort of fit within a framework, and it's funny. It's like, shitcoining is basically just noise. Shitcoining is saying that, oh, okay, we don't need an octave in music. We can just play whatever fucking note we want to play. Like it doesn't make any sense.
No, we can do it, we should, but maybe you shouldn't because it hurts our ears. It's not pleasant.
It sounds fucking bad. Yeah. It's yeah.
A lot of people have bad taste, as we found out over the last 14 years.
That is true. That is true. And you know what? And then they try and turn the bad taste into a virtue. Did you see that? Like there was an ad the other day like celebrating ugliness or some shit.
No, I didn't
I was
see
like,
it.
you gotta be fucking kidding me, bro. I was like, I mean, I've honestly like I've kind of like muted and unsubscribed from a lot of the clown world news and all that sort of stuff because I just can't handle it anymore. Like I know how retarded the world is, and just being reminded of it every day, like I just don't think it's good for the soul anymore. Like I think we all got sucked into the psyop in 2020, 2021, 2022. Like me particularly, like last year, if I look back on my, particularly my behavior on Twitter and stuff like that, I was like an angry motherfucker. And I think it was just a function of just, I don't know, man. Like I was just frustrated with just like how categorically stupid everything was. So I think like for my own mental health, like I've stopped like paying any attention to that stuff, but some stuff still seems to like find its way through the cracks. And I just saw that yesterday. I was like, oh, fuck, you gotta be kidding me. Let's celebrate being ugly and fat.
I'm happy to report that I missed that psyop, that messaging. Doesn't surprise me it's out there. But no, I agree. Actually, my Twitter usage has gone down pretty significantly over the last 3 months.
Dude, mine since December, like, I just like got off from Christmas and I just haven't properly been back on. Like I maybe tweeted like 20 times in the last month. It feels so fucking good.
Yeah,
like,
it does. And that's the other thing is it's not, I didn't make like the intentional decision to tweet less. I think I've just been busier with family life and work and been more focused on
real stuff. Right?
Real stuff. Yeah, exactly. Which is I'm happy that it's happening. It's Twitter is a very potent distraction when you're actually trying to get shit done.
It really is, man. Like it just sucks you in. And like one thing that helped me was like I deleted the app from my phone, so like the only way I access it now is through the computer, and that's like it's helped a lot. Like I mean, it's funny. Like we keep coming back to this theme of quality and quantity, right? It's like quality is just so precious, and it's funny. It's like quality is wasted on the youth. Because when you're young, you got this kind of illusion that everything's going to be great. You're fit, like you heal really quickly. Like I've noticed this as well. Like, when I was in my early 20s, like I had this major motorbike accident once. Like I got bumped by a truck and like I came off my bike and I was going like almost 60 miles an hour. So it was like, maybe 50 miles an hour, it was like 80 kilometers. And I was young and wild. I never wore any protective clothing, never wore any gloves, any of that sort of shit. And I was on a CBR 600 double R, like a sports Honda. And, I slid down the road for probably like 50 meters, so 50 yards, like I think that's 150 feet. And like I still remember the accident because I was like falling in slow motion. And I remember like earlier that day, I had an alert from my Mac that said you haven't backed up your Mac for 97 days or some shit, and all I could imagine was like my MacBook was in my backpack, and so like I could have fallen on my back and like been okay, but instead like I put my hand down and like I slid on my ass and my hand, and I saved the MacBook. But I like literally ripped the fucking skin off my hand, like clean off my whole palm. And the doctors were like, first of all, you're an idiot for not wearing, gloves and all this sort of stuff. But they're like, you're probably not going to be able to use your hand for a month. Dude, I was back in the gym in 4 days, like 4 or 5 days. I was back in the gym. Like, it was insane. Like, the doctors were like, what the fuck? How did you, like, your skin healed up? Like calling me Wolverine. But now, like 10 years later, motherfucker, I like go to the gym, do a bench press, hurt my back, and then I'm fucked up for like a week.
You're laid up. Yeah,
bro, it's so bad. So I don't know, like the older you get, the more, you sort of think back to your youth. You like kind of want to slap yourself in the face. It's like, quality motherfucker. Like, cause you just, you scatter all your energy like in your 20s. Like you're doing like 10 million things at once. Like you're so fucking busy being busy. You're just like expending all this energy and like, sort of come to this point where I'm like, man, it's not about quantity. Like it really isn't about more stuff, more things. Like it's about like trying to like condense that to a few things, and like focus is a superpower.
Yeah. Focus is a superpower, and impact, right? Like when you're focused on quantity, doing as much as you possibly can, you have just like a flattened out impact in all those different experiences that you're embarking on. Where if you focus on quality of a few things, you can have a much larger impact than you would if you were spread thin. That's something.
It's like it's concentration, right? Yeah,
exactly. That's something I'm going back to like the diamond thing. I think that's something I've experienced in the last 5 years, particularly in the professional life with this podcast, the newsletter, the mining stuff, and 1031. It's really like at a point where I'm just sort of trying to perfect the focus that I have on these things, instead of, I think maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I was trying to get involved in as many things as possible. It's like, no, I'm good at these things. Let's focus on this and make these better.
Yeah. Adulting, bro. That's I think that's the stage we're at now, like trying to become adults.
Yeah, it's probably not a coincidence that I've had 2 children over that span as well, which is
totally. And yeah, I mean, for me, I'm not at the kid stage yet, but yeah, I actually decided to take the leap. Like when I was younger, I never thought I was going to get married, and then here I am. Like, and you know what? I think a part of that actually has been, the idea of, maturity and time preference and shit like that has come from Bitcoin. So, maybe that answers my question that I was talking about earlier, is like, does Bitcoin have an impact on that? And, if it's not Bitcoin specifically that has the impact, at least it's the perception that a bunch of us Bitcoiners have that, time preference is important. And, we've kind of like expanded on this idea, and it's almost become like a bit of a mind virus. It's like, slow down, focus, think long term. And, we're finding our own maturity in the presence of something like Bitcoin, which is kind of really interesting to see.
Yeah. And we're like going back to like time and how old we are too. I'm in my early 30s now. It's so weird. I found Bitcoin when I was 21, and just being exposed to it for the better part of a decade, a full decade almost. It's like you learn. I've seen too many shitcoin market cycles, too many Bitcoin, like this bear market, everybody was freaking out, and I felt relatively calm, cool, and collected, and able to focus. There was a lot of people, I've witnessed a lot of people during this bear market freak out and lose focus, where this is the exact time to be doubling, tripling down, and really like building out what will be successful in the next cycle.
Totally. Is there any other threads you want to pull on from the Austrian edition?
I think we should talk about Michael's piece, because I think that's a really powerful piece. I actually helped him. I actually read that a couple times for him before it was published. I think it was just an extremely important piece to really understand the governance of Bitcoin and the importance of running a full node and how that fits into the context of Austrian theory.
Mm-hmm. So what, if you had to sum up the importance of a node, because even to this day, I still have an element of trouble in like trying to, how can I say, like speaking to my mum, for example, like I don't think I would be able to convince her of like, the importance of running a node. So how do you generally go about explaining that, or why is it important? What's your one-liner?
Well, I don't know if it's a one-liner, but if you juxtapose it, I think it's all about like freedom of association and participation in this truly distributed network that will give you assurances that can bring a sound money standard to the world, right? When you juxtapose it with the centrally controlled central banking system with master nodes, very few full nodes, master nodes, you can't audit, you can't, there's no transparency, you don't have any say on how that monetary system works because you're not allowed to run a node. I think the power of running a full node really comes in with the ability to validate, to get transparency, and to participate in the governance structure via the software that you decide to download or to use as your node software. Not very articulate, not succinct, but I mean, I think it all comes back to freedom of association, participating, and most importantly, recognizing that participation is key if you want to preserve the qualities that Bitcoin, the value prop that Bitcoin gives the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been so I was doing some writing the other day about like coming back to the samurai thought. So the samurai, their weapon was obviously the sword, right? And the sort of the theory is that the soul of the samurai resides in the sword. They get given the wooden kendo stick from the age of 5, and basically their whole progression as a young boy through to teenagehood, when they're actually given the sword and become a man at the age of 15, they're given the real sword. From that age, it's sort of like this. The analogy I made, like for the Bitcoiner, their sword is their key, basically their keys. In a sense, it's like that is the quintessential piece of your Bitcoin arsenal, for lack of a better term, right? And then I was trying to find like an analogy for the node, and I thought of like the horse or something like that, because like both in samurai culture and in the word chivalry relates to horsemanship. In the West, it's like the knight with the horse was seen as the protector of the property, or the consensus, the protector of kind of like governance in a sense in the realm or in the region. And like the node is almost like the horse. It's like sure, if you hold your Bitcoin keys as an individual, that's one thing, and you have your private property. That's like having your sword, but like being the knight, and being the participant in the enforcement of the consensus rules in the network. And I know I'm stretching here with fucking analogies, but like there seems to be some sort of overlap to me. It's like running a node is basically, I think this has been said probably by Michael or someone like that, but it's like it makes you a first-class Bitcoin citizen, not just a dependent with some keys. And I think that there's probably like the utilitarian argument for running your own node, I think, is quite weak, because sure, like I can run my own node and I can check it myself, but I think there is like a more of like a noble argument for running a node. It's like, are you a fucking Bitcoin peasant, or are you like a Bitcoin, first class citizen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, definitely. I think that going back, maybe it's not really part of the utilitarian sort of meme behind running a node, but if we're being honest, like you do need a certain number of Bitcoin first class citizens to ensure that the network doesn't become perturbed and co-opted in the future. And so, yeah, maybe it is like the hero's journey of a knight or a samurai, where we need to engender that type of culture with I don't know exactly what the number is, but certainly at least at least some number of people to ensure that the network survives.
Yeah, it's almost like a duty, right? And this is sort of like, you look at all these feudal cultures or the warrior cultures and all that sort of stuff, is they had like the primary warrior caste, and it was their duty to defend the land or to defend the territory, do that sort of stuff. So in many ways, like the node runners are the defenders of the Bitcoin territory or the Bitcoin consensus rules. And there's, I think, this is why I'm kind of leaning towards the noble call to be that person, not because just you can trick transactions, but it's like you are like an official Bitcoiner when you have a node. Until then you're just like
a dependent,
a dude with a wallet. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Unfortunately, I think the storm that has come over the town that you're currently in is affecting the noise. But so I think we're gonna have to wrap unless the storm stops soon. It
ain't gonna stop. No, it ain't gonna stop. It's gonna get worse. Yeah.
So where can anybody get their hands on the Bitcoin Times, the Austrian edition?
Yes.
Is it sold out yet?
So it is. No, it's not sold out yet. It's I sell it in like 500 chunks. So to give people some context here really quickly, there will be 21 editions over 21 years. Each edition is going to have its own theme. So as we said, Austrian edition last year. This year is going to be the Energy edition. And there is a collectible of each one being printed. And that's what Marty has if you're watching the video in the back there. If you're listening, if you jump on bitcointimes.io, you can see what the collectible looks like, but it's like a gorgeous print of the magazine itself in like a thick, high quality paper stock. And there's 2,100 of each of the collectibles being printed. So at the moment, only edition 3, 4, and 5 have been printed. I'm getting 1 and 2 redesigned, so that way there's like a consistency to the theme. So they'll go out probably in March or April or something. And it's only available for sats. Each one is numbered uniquely on the back. So like for example, issue 1, 21, 2100, 1031, and 1984. I think those ones are going to be auctioned off. But yeah, what Marty's sort of pointing to there, each one has a unique number. So people, I know like there's a bunch of people that are collecting them, like Mark Moss, for example, he gets issue number 10 of every edition. So 10 of 2100. And Brandon Quillen, for example, gets number 33 of 2100. So each sort of people collect them in that way. But yeah, they're available on bitcointimes.io. You can get a 3-pack for a discount. I also do flat rate shipping, so that saves you some sats. And I'm going to chuck a code for Marty, which is going to be TFTC on checkout. And I can't remember how I set that up. I think that'll save you about 30,000 sats or something like that off the rate. So if you want to support the work, support the people who are writing it, and start collecting these suckers, it's only the creme de la creme of writers. So hope you'll jump on and check it out.
I can attest to the quality of the content and the quality of the actual product. It's very high quality. I have issue, or not issue, I have number 150 out of 2100 of the Austrian edition. I'm very happy to have it. Yeah, I've got my stack. I've got 3, 4, and 5 right here. I will pick up 1 and 2 once they're released in print later this year, and I hope to grow the stack to 21 issues tall.
It's gonna look sexy when it's done, man. It's gonna look beautiful. I just gotta keep coming up with fucking novel ideas, I think, each year. So like energy's coming up. I think, another obvious one will be like the philosophy edition, probably like a theology edition, Christianity and shit like that. I think there's gonna be some good ones. But if anyone's got any ideas and shit like that, like I've got the Twitter handle is Timeless Bitcoin, so like reach out, let me know. But I'm planning ahead for this one.
Yeah, one thing you've done too, I mean, you do have sponsors throughout, but you've like matched the aesthetic of the whole issue with the sponsors, which I think is unique as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I tried to. Yeah, I think the design thing for me was just super important, because that's like, these days with like the amount of, we sort of said it before, like tongue in cheek, like, everyone's a Bitcoin writer, but like also in the modern world in general, like everyone's a fucking author now. And the amount of like hack books that are out there, like that are just like whipped up, as, like there's people doing courses about, how to write a book in 30 days, and you like put together like a skeleton thing and like, blah, blah, blah. And it's just so like cheap and hacky, and it's like just like run of the mill crap that is just regurgitated from somebody else. And for me, I wanted to just really do something different with this. It's like, okay, let's put some real effort in, because that's like a 2-month worth of designing and thinking about like how the imagery and the visuals kind of like tell the story of the theme and the articles and stuff like that. So yeah, like thank you for picking that up, because there's a lot of work that went into this that I think it'll take a keen eye to see.
Well, thank you for producing it. Thank you for the conversation. Yeah, it went in a direction Absolutely, I wasn't expecting, but I'm very happy that it did.
For sure.
As always.
Thank you.
Freaks, go to bitcointimes.io, pick up the latest edition, and keep a lookout for 1 and 2, and then the energy edition, which should be out later this year. Enjoy the rest of your storm. It seems like sounds like a storm that you go and you sit and you watch it pass by.
It really is. I'm just going to fucking chill out and relax, bro. I'm done for the day.
All right. Enjoy it.
Thanks, brother.
Peace and love, freaks.